Okay, so for whatever the fuck reason, I decided let me do a comprehensive review on the game Detroit Become Human, which you are seeing here with the ST200 looking at me from behind. Almost kind of creepy right now. Anyways, so let's get into the game. And while I'm going over my review, I'm just going to go through the flowchart a little bit just so you can kind of see how in-depth this game gets. So Detroit Become Human is a basically a um, narrative game. It's a story-driven game. One thing that really attracted to me off the bat was when I was a kid, I used to like to read those choose your own way adventure novels and play all the old Sierra Online games and get frustrated by the fact that I couldn't find my way back to whatever space time I came from because I didn't copy down the coordinates when I first left. But oh well, that's in the past. So the one thing about this game that it hails and it does better than any other game out there is the sheer amount of choices that you can do in the game. As you can see, there are there are a lot of things to do even if you're following a linear path. The game focuses around three primary characters: Cara, Markkus. So Cara is an AX400, kind of like a housemaid model android. Markkus is a prototype model. He was given as a gift. Um, and Connor, which is an RX-800. He's uh, there to help police, basically, and investigate crimes involving androids. Um, so, um, I lost my train of thought for a second, but that's perfectly okay. So, as far as the what it tries to do, which is create this ability for you to have a unique story based on how you play through the game, it does that very well. For the most part, the stories, all three stories, are very well written. Um, However, I do find the Cara dialogue, the dialogue in the Cara storyline, to be a little bit disappointing, which I'll get into later. And um, that's actually more disappointing because Cara is the character that basically inspired this whole game being made. If you remember back to the tech demo that Quantum Dreams did so many years ago. So here you can see how many different ways that the story can start to branch off fairly early in the game. Um, so first thing, let's talk about gameplay. Well, the gameplay is not your traditional game. I haven't played a Quantic Dreams game before. The only game I played like this was a game called Press X to Not Die. Um, and so that's the only thing I can really relate to this, where the gameplay is similar. You enter prompts to proceed to do whatever action based on what kind of story. Although in this one, you can also walk around, explore, and interact with certain things in the environment. Um, the controls, so being that the controls are fairly simple and straightforward, there's no real issue with the controls whatsoever. Um, as far as bugs, this game came out with relatively bug free. There was one bug which I think they've fixed now in a recent patch where the game would just have an error and freeze up. Outside of that, the only other bugs I've seen are little minor things like here in Fugitives, where right down here I've only been able to get both things to unlock at one point once, and then when I went and played through it again, it undid all that. Um, Plus, there's a couple other instances, like right here, where I haven't seen anybody figure out how to get that yet, and I've tried a bunch of things myself and haven't been able to figure that out. So there's two other spots like that that seem to be relatively unlockable. So I'm gonna consider that for now as a bug. Um, on the other technical aspect of it, the game is done completely motion capture. Um, Now here's where I got to talk a bit about the financial aspect of the game, because you generally have two types of motion capture. There's one where, well, they both involve putting the dots on the face and wearing the black jumpsuits, but there's extra motion capture they can do that also has facial cameras. Now that has trade-offs. One, it gives you better facial performance on all the motion capture. However, it's more expensive and takes up a lot more disk space. So, being that this game was already fairly decent in size, I can't really blame them for um, going either way. I can't really like praise one and fault the other, because this game has literally over 50 hours of motion capture, which is very expensive, and compared to like a movie, which um, only has about 2 or 3 hours of motion capture. I'm talking about combined motion capture into scenes. Because this game has so many different things that you can do and so many different ways that it branches off. One playthrough of the game lasts about 10 hours, and then going through all of the other things um, in the game. Like, I've literally been playing this game. I don't know. I'm like well over 100 hours now, and there's still one thing I didn't. Well, two things that I didn't unlock that I know I can unlock. Um, Here you see another thing down here where people don't. I haven't been able to find out what exactly it is yet. Um, so so yeah, I mean, I can understand that both from a technical and a financial perspective of why not to use the facial motion capture. Um, the music of the game is utterly phenomenal. Um, they went with the choice of having three different composers write the soundtracks for the different characters: Markkus, Cara, and Connor. And I thought that was a brilliant idea. And each soundtrack really feels distinct. You can definitely tell it's a different person that came up with the music for each one. Um, let's see what else. The writing, the, the stories are pretty good. The If you ask me, the writing of this game focused more on fleshing out Marcus's storyline. And I know I already mentioned about dialogue and the writing a little bit more, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate that because I can't think of what I was going to talk about next. So it makes for good filler. Um, oh, the environment. The environment is great. One thing that the developers have said was they weren't going for a science fiction feel. They were going for a um, what's it called? An approximation feel. What would Detroit be like 20 years from now? Because this place takes place in 2038. So they wanted something that was realistic, so way that society could evolve, and a lot of the nuances that they put in, how people interact with androids, things like police, politics, political situations. They are all things that you can definitely see being feasible within the next 20 years. Um, so overall, I do recommend getting Detroit. Um, it is something that I do think it was worth paying the day one price for. Um, Despite the biggest drawback for me on a title that is so heavily based on the story, um, without any kind of other aspects of the gameplay, is that the faults in the story kind of are, they have to be the one of the biggest weighed things of the game. And that's what I'm going to talk about now into more detail. So coming up is spoilers. So if you don't want to have any spoilers, you can just stop watching here. So all the spoiler stuff. So there's a lot, well, not a lot, but there are a couple instances that don't make the dialogue doesn't make any sense. Now, this is something to be expected in just how complicated the pathway through this game is. And that's fine when that happens. Like, there's one situation where if Connor becomes deviant, but Markkus was expelled from Jericho and you chose not to come back as Markkus, there, if I remember correctly, that's how it was. But what was it? Connor talks to Simon, and you can choose two different dialogue options, and both characters basically wind up saying the same thing, one right after the other. And there's another instance where, but that's a minor thing. That's just like, whoops, no big deal. Big thing with the dialogue is 2 point. Just Markkus doesn't really have any. Like I said, his story is the most fleshed out character, a fleshed out story with all the dialogue and everything in it. And his storyline, you don't really have the responses that don't make sense to whatever dialogue option you choose. You have that in Connor's usually. And not so much in Cara's either, but her storyline dialogue has other issues, which I'll get to. In the two big things in Connor's storyline is there's one part towards the end of the game where he's talking to Amanda, and you have the option to ask about his series. Well, the line that he asks is, he asks if he's the only model. And that's something completely pointless to ask, considering the fact that he's stated previously, which means he well knows that he's not unique and he's just replaceable. Another dialogue line is if you turn deviant and you're talking with Markkus or you have Markkus talk to him in a church, he says, well, I should have known the humans were using me, and that doesn't make sense because he was built for a purpose. It's a dialogue line that just really just kind of makes you, it breaks the immersion for me, and it's just like, what the fuck is he talking about? So and then one other thing with Connor that is not major, but I feel it's worth bringing up. Where is if Hank doesn't help you find the location of Jericho, and he does not commit suicide, but you'll still see him in Chapter 31 if you go deviant with Connor. So if Hank is neutral, and alive, you'll still see him in in the Cyberlife Tower, which, especially given the dialogue, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I would only expect to see Hank there if you got your relationship level up to friends. Now, Cara's dialogue. With Cara's dialogue, Alice doesn't really talk a whole lot, which is understandable. She winds up being this. She's mainly a utility character to kind of reflect off of Cara. She has very few instances where her dialogue actually becomes meaningful and kind of develops her character, which is understandable given the situation that she starts off the story in. Um, but the main thing is the whole issue with Alice being an android, and not only an android, a deviant android apparently. Um, and the dialogue, what it doesn't know which way it wants to go with the characters. In Fugitives, if you meet Ralph, you will he'll make an illusion that he he'll allude to the idea that she's not a human, that she's an android. But then the next chapter, um, he wants her to eat breakfast. Luther will ask Cara if she's noticed anything strange about Alice, which implies that Luther realizes that Alice is an android. And then Alice comes out and says, "Why do humans hate us?" Pretty much confirming that she's an android. Um, and if you're really slow and you pay attention in the beginning, you see Alice's model, but it's like really blurred out. But if you pay attention to it, you can kind of pick it up. And after that, Luther keeps saying the same thing over again. There's something I have to tell you about Alice. And what this does is it unintentionally breaks the fourth wall, where the storyline doesn't want to break the fourth wall, and that becomes really bad. And that's why I say that Cara's storyline winds up being the most disappointing of the three. Especially like I said, because the whole premise of the game was based around the tech demo with the Cara character. Um, so the ultimate issue is that Cara suffers from a delusion of thinking Alice is human because she wants Alice to be human. At least that's the best as I can put together from the story, from all the other story. Um, so the dialogue would have been much better served to push that narrative directly rather than the unintentional breaking of the fourth wall. So instead of saying, "Hey, Cara, there's something I gotta tell you about Alice," a way much more effective way to go around about it would have been saying, just basically, uh, Luther asking Cara why he's treating why she's acting a certain way. Why does she act a certain way towards Alice? Because once Alice basically reveals that she's an android, there's no secret to the player anymore, and saying the line like there's a secret, when you know that Cara knows, but for whatever reason she's denying it, just winds up taking a huge thing away from the storyline as a whole. So that is how one little mistake in choice of wordings can cause a drastic um, pullback from the player experience. Um, Other than that, the only other thing I have to say negatively is that the character Lucy, which is in Markkus' storyline, is kind of like this almost prophetic empath. Um, she's kind of superfluous. I think her purpose in the different scenes would have been much better handled in different ways. Um, so I offer these criticisms mainly as a way to kind of look and see where the mistakes were to try and help improve on them. I mean, that's for me personally. That's how I am. If I I don't like praise. I only like constructive criticism, so I can see where I can do better. So that's why I'm doing this in this uh, fashion. But yeah, like I said, other than that, the the story is really well done. Oh, and I do have to say, you know, um, last minute thought, and also ending on a good note. The Freedom March chapter is probably one of the best scenes. Well, it is the best scene in the game, and it is a scene that will stand out. Um, it just stands out. period. It's a really great scene, really well done. The music, which is so gentle, but the what the scene is trying to accomplish is really bold and strong, and it just pulls it off so well. Um, and that's one thing of, oops, how, the sometimes, more often than not, the gentlest actions often have the strongest impact. And that scene really, really just does it. So that is pretty much it. As you can see, there's one more thing there that I can't find how to unlock. Um, so yeah, that's my take on Detroit Become Human, and I did this because I enjoyed this type of game. I do want to see more games like this. Um, I do enjoy games not specific, some games not specifically for the gameplay themselves, but for the storyline. So seeing a game that's heavily focused on stories and your choices you make through the stories is something that I think a lot of people would like to see. And you had a big disappointment with um, the Mass Effect trilogy, the way it ended. Um, and like I said, when I was a kid, I used to love to read those choose your own way books. I also love pop-up books too, but that's something different. All right, so that's all my thoughts and concerns and criticisms and praises. Yeah, if you like this video, I don't give a shit. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can wish in one hand and crap in the other and see which one fills up first, because I don't really have an interest in doing this on a regular basis. So that's it. Bye.